They told me I was on trial, though no one could say for what, and somehow I understood that guilt had preceded my birth. I stand before an invisible court, accused by the silence that breathes between thoughts. No gavel strikes, no sentence is read, yet judgment seeps through the pores of existence like an odor one cannot wash away. The air hums with unseen whispers, the bureaucratic murmurs of an unseen tribunal, eternal and unyielding. In this endless courtroom of the soul, every question turns into another accusation, and every answer deepens the charge. The corridors of this court stretch infinitely, lined with doors that lead nowhere, yet behind each door there is always the sound of papers being shuffled. Documents filled with my name, written in a language I can neither read nor deny. The clerks are faceless, their pens moving with the rhythm of inevitability. They do not look up when I pass, for they already know the outcome. I am both petitioner and accused, defender and condemned, the entire trial carried within the trembling shell of my being. Sometimes I wonder if the judges exist at all. Perhaps they are only reflections of my own conscience, multiplied in the mirrors of memory, distorted until even my shadow begins to testify against me. The trial continues in every breath, every hesitation, every flicker of thought that questions its own right to exist. To resist is to confirm my guilt. To surrender is to accept a verdict never declared. There are moments, brief and merciful, when the courtroom dissolves, when the city streets appear normal, when the sky forgets to loom. Yet even then, the echo of the trial follows me, faint but insistent, like the ticking of a hidden clock measuring not time, but justification, and I know that soon I will be called again. Not by name, but by the weight of my silence. I once asked a guard what law I had broken. He smiled without moving his lips. "The one you are living," he said, and closed the door gently, as though sealing a coffin. Since then, I have learned not to ask. The questions themselves are witnesses. Now I sit in the endless waiting room of consciousness, watching the procession of my own thoughts pass in judgment. There is no exit, only the slow unfolding of an unseen verdict written long before I arrived. The trial is not something happening to me, it is me, and perhaps that is the final absurdity, that innocence is indistinguishable from guilt, and the courtroom will remain open long after I am gone, awaiting the next soul who mistakes awakening for acquittal. The silent indictment that no one escapes begins before one even learns the language of guilt. It hums beneath the first heartbeat, a wordless accusation carried in the marrow, as though existence itself were evidence of some unspoken transgression. You wake each day to the same quiet summons, not by voice, but by the weight of awareness pressing gently on the chest. The world looks innocent, yet every wall, every reflection, every clock seems to bear witness against you. There is no prosecutor, no written charge, and yet you feel the trial has already begun. It is not a crime of action, but of being. Simply to exist is to have trespassed upon some hidden law, one whose nature you cannot know yet, whose authority is absolute. You search for the origin of this guilt, tracing your steps through memory, but each recollection folds back into itself like an empty corridor. The more you recall, the less you understand, until even the attempt to remember becomes suspect. You realize that confession is inevitable. Not because you know your sin, but because silence has become unbearable. The indictment is not shouted. It seeps through the pauses between words, through the gaze of strangers who do not look at you yet somehow see too much. At night, when the world retreats into shadows, the feeling grows clearer. You sense an unseen court convening somewhere behind your thoughts, gathering evidence from your dreams, compiling reports on every fleeting doubt, every hidden resentment, every half-forgotten desire. You can almost hear the quills scratching in the dark. They are documenting you, not your deeds, but your hesitations, your unspoken fears, your smallest betrayals of sincerity. And though you know this tribunal cannot be real, its judgment feels truer than the waking world. You begin to act carefully, measuring each word, each movement, as if good behavior might reduce the sentence. But goodness itself becomes a performance, rehearsed for an invisible audience whose standards you can never meet. You start to suspect that the indictment does not seek justice at all. It merely sustains the structure of your consciousness, the architecture of self-scrutiny that keeps you imprisoned within yourself. Perhaps the court exists because you do, and to silence it would mean to vanish with it. There are moments of revolt, brief flickers of defiance, where you dare to believe in your innocence, but even that belief is stained, for to claim innocence is to acknowledge the existence of guilt. You are caught in the paradox of perpetual justification, explaining your right to breathe, to think, to desire. No verdict will ever be read, yet the sentence continues through time, passed down through generations, a hereditary burden of conscience. The silent indictment is the heartbeat of humanity, the unseen judge that lives within every soul, whispering not of punishment, but of the eternal incompleteness that defines being itself. The labyrinth of laws without origin stretches beyond comprehension, a vast and shifting architecture of invisible corridors that twist through the very fabric of existence. No one remembers who wrote these laws, or even if they were ever written at all. They seem to arise spontaneously, like mist from cold ground, taking form in the moment one becomes aware of them. You learn their rules only by breaking them, and by then, it is already too late. Each gesture, each word, each unspoken thought falls under their jurisdiction. You begin to move through life as though through a minefield of meanings, never certain which step will summon the faceless inspectors, or awaken the echoing hum of unseen machinery that enforces the world's obscure order. It is not a court you can locate on a map, yet its influence pervades everything. Every door may open into a chamber of inquiry. Every conversation may serve as testimony. The laws shift according to your perception, adapting to the tremor of your conscience, as if they are alive, sensitive to fear, guilt, hesitation. One moment, a law demands silence, the next, it punishes you for not speaking. You try to interpret the pattern, but interpretation itself becomes a violation. There is no final rule book, only interpretations of interpretations, layered endlessly like the walls of a maze that both encloses and defines you. You sometimes glimpse others wandering these corridors too, their faces pale with confusion. You ask them what offense they committed, but their answers are uncertain, their voices hollow with doubt. They too are searching for the center of the labyrinth, believing that somewhere, in its heart, there must exist a clear principle, a law that explains all others. Yet those who wander longest know the truth: there is no center. The laws exist only to perpetuate themselves, a self-sustaining system of meaning that feeds on the bewilderment of those who seek to understand it. In this world, even freedom becomes a clause, an exception within an unseen statute. To act spontaneously is to risk violation, yet to obey blindly is to lose all trace of self. The labyrinth does not confine the body but the understanding, weaving uncertainty into the fabric of thought until every idea becomes an act of submission. You are both subject and object, observer and prisoner, endlessly interpreting the rules of a game whose purpose is to prevent you from ever leaving the table. Sometimes, in rare flashes of lucidity, you sense that the laws might not exist at all, that the entire structure is a mirage sustained by collective belief, a metaphysical bureaucracy feeding on the terror of disobedience. But the moment that thought arises, a deeper fear follows. If there are no laws, then there is also no meaning, no order, no reason for anything to continue. And so, the labyrinth rebuilds itself instantly, as if from your own need for certainty, closing in with silent precision, ensuring that the trial of existence never truly ends. The shifting faces of the unseen judges hover at the edge of perception, never quite visible, yet always felt, as if the air itself were conscious of your every intention. Their presence is not confined to a single place or time. They exist in the flicker of hesitation before you speak, in the uneasy awareness that your actions are being silently interpreted by forces you cannot name. Sometimes they appear as shadows cast by your own thoughts, distorted by the trembling flame of conscience. Other times, they inhabit the voices of those around you, The friend whose gaze lingers too long, the stranger whose silence feels like scrutiny. You cannot tell if these judges are external or born from within, but their judgment seeps through every surface, every moment, like an invisible verdict carried on the breath of existence. You try to imagine their faces, but the image changes each time. One wears the calm mask of reason, another the hollow grin of indifference. Some appear ancient, with eyes eroded by centuries of observation. Others seem newly formed, mirroring your own features, as though you have become your own accuser. They shift because truth itself is unstable, and in their shifting, they remind you that there is no fixed self to stand trial. Only a procession of identities, each condemned for not being the next. The judges know this. They feed on it. Their court requires the fluidity of guilt, not the solidity of justice. There are moments when you think you have escaped their gaze, when the room falls silent and your thoughts seem to belong solely to you. But soon a faint rustling returns, a bureaucratic whisper in the fabric of the mind. You realize that their tribunal is not housed in any cathedral or chamber, but nested deep within awareness itself. They observe through memory, through dream, through the subtle tremor of longing that betrays the soul's restlessness. Every decision, every retreat, every fleeting desire becomes an unintentional testimony. You have been confessing all along, not in words, but in the quiet transparency of being alive. At times, you want to face them directly, to demand an explanation, to ask what law you have broken, but the moment you summon the courage to look, their faces dissolve into smoke. Their authority lies precisely in their absence. The less you can see them, the more they control you. Their power is the power of interpretation. They decide what your silence means, what your guilt consists of, what your intentions imply before you even form them. They are the reflection of the world's unreadable consciousness, the projection of an order that thrives on uncertainty. And so, you learn to live in the tension of their invisible gaze, performing life as though every act were evidence in an eternal case. You begin to understand that the judges are not seeking truth, but continuity. That the trial must persist for the world to keep its shape, that without their ever-shifting faces, existence itself might dissolve into nothingness. The confession born from not knowing is the most honest of all confessions, and yet it is also the most tragic, for it arises not from revelation, but from the exhaustion of inquiry. You confess because you cannot endure the silence that follows every question, the blank immensity that greets every attempt to understand why you are being judged. The words escape you before they are formed, spilling from the lips like water from a cracked vessel. You admit to everything, though you know nothing. In this way, confession becomes a ritual of surrender, not to truth, but to incomprehension. The act itself is a plea for mercy from the void, an attempt to appease an unseen authority with the currency of your own uncertainty. It begins subtly, in the slow erosion of certainty. You once believed you could defend yourself. That reason might offer protection. That the evidence of your innocence would eventually surface. But as the days pass, you discover that the court does not seek facts, it feeds on ambiguity. Every explanation becomes suspect, every justification an additional proof of guilt. The more you speak, the deeper you sink into the quicksand of interpretation. And so, you confess, not to any particular crime, but to the sheer impossibility of proving your own existence blameless. The confession offers no relief, only a strange clarity, a stillness that feels almost sacred. It is as if the act of yielding to ignorance opens a door to something vaster, though no less cruel. You realize that perhaps there was never anything to confess, except the human condition itself, the relentless awareness of being alive without understanding why. The words, "I am guilty," become interchangeable with, "I am," as if to exist were already to transgress. The courtroom of the soul accepts your confession not as closure, but as continuation. The trial expands to include the very admission of not knowing, the very inability to escape meaning's gravitational pull. You begin to notice that others too are confessing in silence. Some do it through the language of apology, others through endless explanation, and some through the quiet resignation of those who have ceased to question altogether. Their confessions are woven into the fabric of daily life. A bowed head, a forced smile, a tremor in the voice when speaking of hope. The world itself seems built upon these confessions, each one an offering to the nameless authority that governs existence. There comes a point when you no longer distinguish between confession and communication. Every statement carries the shadow of an unspoken plea. You realize that not knowing has become your only certainty, your only truth worth declaring. And so you continue to confess, to the silence, to the air, to the formless witnesses within. You confess not to be forgiven, but to remain visible in a world that threatens to forget you, to assert your trembling presence in the vast indifference of the unseen court. The sentence that is life itself is not proclaimed in a moment of judgment, nor sealed by the sound of a gavel, but unfolds quietly from the instant of consciousness. It is not imposed by a judge or jury, but inherited at birth, woven into the rhythm of breath and heartbeat. To live is to serve a sentence whose duration and nature are never disclosed. Each day is both continuation and punishment, an endless repetition of unfulfilled understanding. You wake, not to freedom, but to the dull realization that the execution of this sentence is indistinguishable from existence itself. The punishment is not inflicted upon you from without, it emanates from within, a slow corrosion of certainty, a constant reminder that to exist is to stand perpetually accused by the very act of being. You spend your life seeking meaning in the sentence, hoping that somewhere in its unfolding lies redemption, or at least explanation. Yet the structure of it is too intricate, too mercurial, to be deciphered. Every attempt to escape it merely deepens its hold, as if the labyrinth has been built not to contain you, but to define you. The sentence becomes the architecture of your identity, invisible, yet binding. It determines the limits of your thought, the boundaries of your desire, the tempo of your despair. You carry it with you like a shadow that refuses to detach, even in darkness. There are moments when you believe the sentence might be commuted. In love, in faith, in fleeting moments of beauty, where the weight seems to lift. But these are only brief recesses in the trial, intermissions between hearings. The sentence resumes quietly afterward, as though mocking the very notion of reprieve. You begin to understand that the system that condemned you is the same one that sustains you. To reject it entirely would be to cease to exist, and so you continue, performing life as both prisoner and warden. You become fluent in the language of restraint, finding small freedoms in gestures, in illusions of choice, in the fragile hope that the sentence carries meaning beyond its cruelty. You imagine, at times, that there must be others like you, serving the same unseen decree. You see them in the streets, in their quiet faces, in the slow, deliberate way they move, as if mindful of some invisible limit. Their eyes reveal the same fatigue, the same unspoken recognition. And yet, each bears the illusion that their sentence is unique, their suffering personal, their trial exceptional. The great irony is that this isolation is part of the design. The sentence is collective, but it must feel solitary to endure. Eventually, the distinction between punishment and life dissolves completely. You realize that no external authority is needed to enforce the terms. The soul becomes its own cell, and awareness the lock that seals it. You walk through days that feel like paragraphs in an eternal decree, each moment a reiteration of the same unspoken laws, that the price of consciousness is servitude to its own endless continuation. And so, the trial continues, not in any courtroom, nor under the scrutiny of mortal law, but within the silent architecture of being. The accusations, the labyrinth, the judges, the confessions, the sentence, they are all fragments of the same machinery, turning endlessly within the heart. There is no escape from it, because the court and the condemned are one. What began as an external judgment reveals itself as the innermost structure of consciousness, a theater where guilt performs itself without audience or applause. Perhaps the only truth that remains is that existence itself is the verdict, and awareness the executioner. To live is to be observed by the unseen, to speak without knowing to whom, to search endlessly for laws written in the invisible ink of experience. The more one resists, the deeper the maze becomes, the more one accepts, the quieter the torment grows, until even despair takes on the shape of devotion. The endless courtroom of the soul does not demand innocence. It demands presence. It is not a punishment for wrongdoing, but a mirror for the unbearable mystery of being. That we are both the crime and its confession, the judge and the accused, endlessly testifying before the silence that birthed us. And somewhere, beneath that silence, in the unspoken corridors of the self, the faint echo of the verdict lingers. Not guilty, not innocent, only alive.